Welcome to episode 2 of Building Cadzand, and right off the bat I will fix two major issues that I completely overlooked in the last episode, the first of which is the fact that the battle took place on November 9th, meaning the landscape would be bare, and you certainly would not have those luscious trees and vegetation that I added near the pond. And I already have some ideas of how I'm going to give the grassy field a more colder feel, and the solution is right here. I think that adding a bunch of sand green plates in patches around the mock will help make it look a little colder. And if I really need to later on, I can play around with the color temperature and settings after I film my stop motion to really set the scene to match the season. So don't really worry about how it looks like right now. Now the second thing I totally forgot, and this goes back to the fact that the battle is lesser known, so there's not much information about the battle, but since Cadzand was a marshland, they had built what's called a dike, which is essentially a mound of earth and clay that they raised to prevent the flow of water during high tide from flooding the villages and farmlands further inland. And this dike would stretch all the way around the perimeter of the island, so I'm thinking here we'll slope up to around minifig height, then come back down to the grassy field here. So now I'm going to set the camera up and we'll get right into the speed build. First I started by clearing out the vegetation and laying out the first layer of brown bricks, which sort of marked where exactly I wanted the dike to begin. I first laid out the full design on a small section there in the back, and when I was happy with the design, I began extending it here. And notice how I'm adding the nougat plates there and then layering the brown bricks above, and that is because I wanted to have a small transition between the brown, which represents dirt and clay, and the nougat, which represents sand mixed with the dirt and clay, which would have been used to make up the dike. I decided to go with the height of around 3 bricks for the dike, which is around minifig level. You can see I put some minifigs down to show you guys. On top and behind the dike, I added green plates simulating the grass and protective vegetation that they would have planted to prevent erosion. The seaward side, however, is rougher since the waves would be constantly crashing into it during high tide, so that was sort of the whole idea here. Now it's time to work on this other side, which I mentioned before was going to be the more rough and swampy looking side, so here again I began adding some filler brick to really make sure it was sturdy. And also notice how I have opted for some dark brown and dark tan colors on the base of the dike here, which gives it a more rough aesthetic. And this time on top of the dike, I've added some dark green patches. Now it was time to slope the dike back down to ground level, and unfortunately that meant we had to get rid of the little river from the trebuchet mock in order to make room for the dike. But the good news is that it now sort of looks like the ground in the area sort of had to be dug out in order to raise the dike itself. So it didn't turn out to be so bad after all. Here you can see I also added some sand green patches and threw in some other colors here just for variation. I also decided to keep a tiny little puddle there to retain some of that marshy aesthetic, since in November it would have been rainy, so this really fits the atmosphere. I also decided to figure the trees out here a little bit, so I built this tree which is pretty bare. It's only got some dark green leaves left. And then I decided to take this yellow and orange tree from my Raven Knight's castle and modified it a little bit. I also added this olive green tree that I had built previously. And I modified the green tree I built in the last video to also make it bare. And now I decided to move on to the ground here, which was too plain for my taste, so I added a bunch of patches of dark green, sand green, nougat, dark tan, and brown. And then I sort of filled in the gaps in between them with green plates so that everything is completely leveled, so it's easier for me to animate later on. Now this technique is very part intensive since you're basically covering the entire base plate underneath with a new layer of plates, but seeing how I most likely won't build any other large scale mocks in the near future, before disassembling this one at least, I decided why not go the extra mile. And here I decided to smooth out the back side of the dike since I thought that the slope was a little too steep. Also, this time-lapse clip was filmed on my new camera, so you can instantly see the difference in quality there. Honestly, super happy that I upgraded my camera to provide you guys with higher quality content. So let me know what you think of it down in the comments below. And here is the last section that we sort of tore down in the beginning. If you guys remember, this is where the dock was, but I had to tear it down since it wouldn't make sense to have it there now that the dike was obstructing the path to it. But anyway, I decided to add some tide pools and marshy areas that didn't really have time to fully dry out from the high tide. And here you can see me working on the transition between the marshy area and the sandy beach. Now usually harsh transitions like these are quite a challenge, but I think I did a pretty good job here by sort of having that little stream run right down the middle to sort of ease in the transition between the two sides. And lastly, I decided to clear up the beach and cover the tan base plate there a little more with some 2x2 tiles, as well as some of my last remaining tan plates, mostly 1x1s, which is a real pain to build with, let alone tear down. So yeah, shout out to future me who's gonna have to disassemble all of this. But in the end, I think this area turned out to look really good, almost capturing that realistic, uneven, sandy beach look. It even looks like minifig footprints too, which gives the impression that the French soldiers would be moving around while waiting for the English. Alright guys, just for reference, that time-lapse that you just watched consisted of 10 hours of footage. So yeah, quite a lot of time went into this mock in this episode. I think I've done all that I wanted to do in this episode. A lot of it was just fixing earlier mistakes, but honestly, that's just how it goes sometimes, lots of trial and error. But in the end, all that matters is the finished mock. I personally really like how this marshy area out on the front here turned out, even though the whole idea stemmed from me not having enough tan plates to cover the entire front area. Now, during the Battle of Cadzand, we know that the English landed on the sandy beach, so they would have specifically avoided areas like these, but man, I'm very tempted to include some scenes of a few English troops rushing through this marshy terrain, catering more to the cinematic feel of the stop motion rather than solely focusing on realism, but let me know what you guys think of that. Now for the dike we raised, I think it came together really well. It's steep enough to feel like a real barrier, but not so steep that animating minifigs across it will be a problem. I also added a bunch of dead branch elements I picked up from the pick-a-brick wall. At first I wasn't sure on how to use them, but they turned out to be very versatile. You can see them scattered on the trees and mixed into the foliage, which really helps capture that early November look. But my favorite area by far has to be this field right here. I love how despite the fact that the area is almost completely flat, it does a great job blending all the colors and still looks like it has enough depth. And you can even see that I added a large nougat patch there to represent the dead leaves that have fallen from the tree above. Now I know I said this in the last episode, but next time we'll get to build some of the fishing huts here on this elevated ground and add some finishing details on the terrain of the mock. But that's all I've got for today, guys. Be sure to subscribe to stay notified for the next episodes, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.